You, me, and HIFMB. Stories of Science and the Sea.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the next episode of the HIFMB podcast, where we meet with Dorothee Hodapp, a postdoc who works on biodiversity change. And she shares with us her study that recently got published in Global Change Biology: Climate Change Disrupts Core Habitats of Marine Species, a major piece that describes for the entire globe how climate change will affect marine biodiversity. So definitely give this one a listen, because she not only talks about this very important study, but also about her career in science. And on top of that, she also talks about parenting in academia. So without further ado, I give you this great chat with Dorothee Hodapp. Hello everybody, and welcome to the next episode of the HIFMB podcast. And today we have Dorothee Hodapp. And yeah, welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
What do you consider yourself? That's always the main big question.
Yeah, that's a big question and a difficult question.
Yeah.
And I always try and explain it by what I studied along the way.
Mm-hmm.
I studied geoecology first,
Yeah.
which is kind of like environmental science, so a big mixture of everything. And after that, I did a master's in statistics.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a bit like an ecologist who's interested in quantification and data analysis.
Mm.
Yeah.
And right now, what groups are you affiliated with at HIFMB?
I'm not actually sure if I still have a group, to be honest. I mean, like, as of this year, I'm part of the science management team because I'm now affiliated with the transfer office.
Mm-hmm.
But before, I was affiliated with Helmut's working group, like the plankton ecology, where I also did my PhD in. And I was also affiliated with Tom's group, the functional ecology from RV. So because the first cohort of postdocs, it started in 2018, which is when I started at the HIFMB, we were all supposed, or those positions were designed to be a bit of a bridge, like to facilitate collaboration between the university and the Alfred Wegener Institute.
Oh, right,
and
okay.
that's why both, like all of us were affiliated with one group each, with university and RV.
So the institute was founded in 2017?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. And you were amongst the first postdocs?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Do you know if there were PhD students at the time?
Yeah, Tabea, who's
yes.
still with us.
Yeah.
She was there. And also Alisa and Zara, but they all started a little bit later.
Yeah.
I think Tabea started in mid-2018. So all of us, like, there were a couple of postdocs who started in 2017 already.
Mm-hmm.
But most of us started start of or mid of 2018.
Yeah, sweet. So you're one of the foundation members.
Yes, one of the oldest.
Yeah. Okay. And you're here today to talk about your recent paper from Global Change Biology?
Yep.
Yes. Entitled Climate Change Disrupts Core Habitats of Marine Species.
That's right.
Yeah. So that came out recently, right? When?
Maybe like 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
4 weeks ago.
Yeah.
I can't remember, to be honest.
But that's a major hit. Like I remember Helmut flipping out about it on Slack and and being really like, this is major.
Yeah, I read it and was like, nah, that's a bit exaggerating, but I'll take the advertisement.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so in a nutshell, what did you find? Or what did you do? We
looked at current and future distributions or suitable habitat of marine species. So we looked at over 33,500 species, and we used a so-called environmental envelope model. Or there's different names, but this is one that you can name it. And looked at how the species distribution patterns will change depending on 3 different CO2 emission scenarios until the end of the 21st century.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so who's on the team, or how did the team get formed? What sparked the idea to make that?
The first one who came up with the idea to write a paper with Aquamaps data, which is the model, the name of the model, was Rainer Fröse.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of like the father of FishBase, which is a huge trade database on fish. And one tool of FishBase, or that's related to the FishBase database, is this habitat distribution model AquaMaps, which is called AquaMaps. And like stuff got added on, but this is only on fish. But later on, there was been another database that's called Sea Life Base, where there's trait information on all the other marine species apart from fish. And AquaMaps uses the trait information from Fish Base and Sea Life Base, and also information on environmental conditions to then come up with current or future, with whatever kind of information you feed it on, habitat suitability maps for all the different species that it gets data from.
Yeah. Rainer Fröse, where's he based?
He's based at the Geomar in Kiel.
Ah, right. Okay. I remember that from my early studies in my master's. I worked a lot on fish, and we used Fishbase a ton. He did that with Dan Pauly, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I think they both kind of started it all up, and
Yeah.
and then it's been around for a while.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Are they looking for someone to take it over now?
Yeah, kind of. It's difficult because like AquaMaps, because it's so old, it's written, I think, with like SQL queries and stuff. So it's quite, and they hired something, I think, last year to rewrite it. But I mean, it's a huge amount of work.
Yeah.
And also you always need funding for these kinds of things, because of course there's a lot of studies that use Fishbase and AquaMaps data, but in the end, then no one ever really wants to pay for keeping those sites, like databases, up and going. And
Yeah, that's right.
I think they're kind of like in a transition at the moment, but I'm not actually sure what exactly is going to happen.
Okay, let's hope it stays alive, because it was a
Yeah.
major resource for me.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so back to your paper though. So you're the co-author with Irene, who was on, I think, podcast episode, one of the early ones, 6. I don't know, I'm not sure. Yeah, so you're co-authoring with her on this?
Yeah, we share first authorship.
Yeah, nice. How does it actually work if it gets cited? Is it still Hodapp et al. Then? Or is it Hodapp and Roca et al.?
I'm not actually sure. We have not been cited yet.
Okay.
But,
Okay.
It might be Hodapp et al., I think, because they usually, I've never seen a citation of like 2 and then et al.
Yeah, no, me neither.
But I mean, it's written on the paper, and I think like for the important indices, like in terms of publication and stuff, then they count it accordingly, like
Okay.
that we share it.
All right. One of the first sentences is major, so it kind of states that driven by climate change, marine biodiversity is undergoing a phase of rapid change, and it's usually faster than that observed in terrestrial ecosystems. And I quickly wanted to ask why that is.
Yeah, that is. There are a number of studies on that, mostly by Marlene Pinsky and colleagues, and they looked at differences between terrestrial and marine systems, and they came up with a number of reasons for why that could be the case. And I don't think I can remember all of them, but some of them were that there's less refuge space for, like in terrestrial systems, an animal can always go and hide underneath a tree or something if it gets too hot, or like underneath a stone or something, which a lot of people do.
Yeah.
A lot of people.
A lot of people
as well, probably. A big stone. But that's not the case in a lot of marine systems.
Yeah.
And then there's another reason that dispersal can happen a lot faster and because there's hardly any dispersal barriers in marine systems. So species are actually able to just move somewhere else when in case it gets too hot or like there's not enough oxygen or something. And then there's also a reason why they marine animals kind of need to do that is also because they are used to a lot smaller temperature range, because temperature doesn't change that quickly in marine systems as it does in terrestrial systems. So they are accustomed to a lot smaller, or they can tolerate a lot smaller temperature changes than a lot of terrestrial, which then makes it for them like a need to go and move somewhere else if it gets too hot.
Yeah. Potentially, as you've seen with maybe if you ever had aquarium fish, when you have to like put them with the bag that they were bought in the water that you're going to place them in, so that they have time to adapt.
Yeah.
So it's kind of
true.
a
I've
little
never
bit
had an
like
aquarium, but I can imagine that.
Yeah. Okay. So in the paper, you base predictions on their future ranges, on the species' future ranges, based on a multi-parameter habitat suitability model. And if you could quickly explain that.
So maybe I do it sort of word by word. Multi-parameter just means that because so far there have been other studies on range shifts of marine species and also terrestrial species, and a lot of them have based their predictions mainly on temperature, because it is the main factor that's driving shifts in distribution patterns.
Yeah.
But there's also other factors that play a role. So we used temperature, oxygen, salinity, distance from land. So there's a number of, I can't recall them all.
Yeah, no, that's
at the moment. So that's why it's multi-parameter. So we used more than just one environment parameter. And what was the rest of the habitat suitability?
Yes, habitat suitability model.
So habitat suitability is that we, like aqua maps with the information that we get, because a lot of species, there's hardly any information. Like a lot of marine species, you hardly know anything about what kind of temperature ranges or for other environmental parameters they actually have.
Yeah.
So you can only predict based on the information on environmental parameters that you have an area that, depending on environmental condition, would be suited for this kind of species. I mean, there's lots of other conditions and reasons, like interactions with other species, competition, and anthropogenic pressures or something that might make a certain habitat unsuitable for a certain species. But based on the environmental parameters and what you know about the species, where it is occurring, where you've got occurrence records, you suspect that the species would be able to live there.
Okay.
So this is why it is habitat suitability. So it just means this place, depending, like with the current situation of environmental parameters, this could be suitable for species A, B, or C to live there.
And that is what the aqua maps are, or sort of, or did you take what is contained in the aqua maps information and then make those models out of that?
No, this is like aqua maps produces those habitat suitability maps, those global maps for every single species that they have information on.
Okay, and then based on that, you kind of predicted their global projected ranges, and under those 3 CO2 emission scenarios, RCP 2.6, RCP 4.6, and RCP 8.5.
4.5 it is.
4.5, what did I say?
4.6.
4.6, oh sorry. 4.5. Very good.
I'm listening.
Yeah. and then you projected what it's gonna look, what their ranges basically are going to look like in 2100.
Yes, like this is also what we get from aqua maps. We then, with all that information on the different range patterns, we then just calculated how certain biodiversity parameters like richness will change between now and the future, depending on like CO2 emissions. And we looked at species turnover, so how is the species community, the identity of species that live at a certain spot, how much is that going to change? Is there going to be completely different set of species there and at the end of the 21st century, or will it still be the same? Or so those kinds of questions we looked at, and how will those distribution patterns and ranges change? Because there's the tendency that because it's getting too warm around the equator, that species are moving further towards the poles, so either north on the northern hemisphere or south on the southern.
Yeah. Okay. And one of your main results of what comes out of the high emission scenario, so RCP 8.5, is a net loss of 50% of the core habitat of half of all marine species. That's wild.
It's a lot. I mean, you always have to explain a little bit how we get to this. So what we call core habitat area is all the cells, like the whole globe oceans are split up into different grid cells. And for every grid cell, we calculate the probability of occurrence for every single species. How likely is it that a species will occur there under the given environmental conditions? And then we call core habitat area every cell that has a probability that's higher than 0.5.
Okay.
So that means there will likely be other cells that only got a probability of 0.4, where the species could also maybe occur, maybe not. Like it's because it's very difficult to actually have a cutoff. So where do you say, okay, species, because you can't work with like probabilities between like 0.01 and 0.09. So you have to like find a cutoff somewhere, and this is the one that people usually use when they use aquamaps data.
Okay,
but that because it's just important, because like for some we also calculated richness, and richness at the moment is as high as in the tropics, like around the equator and then the Caribbean Sea and so on, and for some of those areas at the end of the 21st century, we actually see like huge differences. Like at the moment you've got like 8,000 species there, and then it drops to like a few hundred or something, like very, very low. Then if you then take into account that doesn't mean that there's not going to be any species there anymore. I mean, there's probably likely going to be a lot less, depending on how much they can actually adapt, which is something that we also don't know. But then you just have to remember, okay, it's core habitat area that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So species will likely be there, but they might not like it as much as they do now.
Okay, all right. And can you, off the top of your head, say what species groups took the biggest hit?
We didn't see huge differences between the different. We looked at and like several different species, like obviously like mammals, and then different types of fish, and like cartilaginous fish, and the
jawless fish, it said.
Yeah,
at some point.
Thank you. And then like things like sea anemones, or like different, or phytoplankton, or different groups, and there was some variation, but
but not like one distinct outlier. Okay.
No.
All right. Another very striking result is that you found gaps around the equator that will appear for, and now it's 8% for the 2.6 scenario, 24% for the 4.5 scenario, and 88% for the 8.5 scenario. So what does that exactly mean?
That only refers to species that currently have a distribution that covers the equator. Like so they occur somewhere a little bit north and somewhere a little bit south of the equator. So, but the area of their habitat range covers somewhere the equator. And then we were just interested. Because somewhere around the equator is also where temperature will be highest, or where temperature is increasing a lot, and where, because those are the highest temperatures anyway, where it is likely that the waters will simply become too hot at some point. And that's why we then, for all the species that at the moment live somewhere around the equator, we calculated the current gaps, which are then zero. We just looked at like the furthest north and the furthest south extent of their habitat range, and then we did that for their distribution patterns and at the end of the 21st century.
Okay.
And what we see is that for a lot of species, and for the high emission scenario, the 8.5, it is 88% of those species that at the moment have those area ranges that go across the equator. For a lot of these species, because the water right at the equator becomes unsuitable, those distributions are actually split.
Yeah.
And some of these distribution patterns, they are split that far that like there's gaps of like 1,000 kilometers in between, because they move actually so far to the north and the south.
Yeah.
And that then means that there's not going to be an exchange of species and genes and stuff between those populations, which then can result either in the development of new species over very long terms, but can also result in that the effective population size of those populations becomes smaller, and therefore they get into higher risks of extinction, for example.
Okay.
It was just one aspect that we looked at. Of course, you could do that at different parts of the world.
Yeah.
But it was just one of those, like a typical area where that could happen.
Yeah, that classical poleward shift that is always talked about. Exactly. Okay. And then for many more species that so those continuous distributional ranges will be disrupted, and thus reducing effective population size is one major.
Exactly. That's what can happen.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a lot of unknowns in all these calculations and predictions.
Right.
But and also that, I mean, like also we don't really know how, like what I said before, like how fast will species be able to adapt to high temperatures.
But one thing you particularly highlight is that, so obviously you have those high invasion rates into the higher latitudes and the polar regions, and that will obviously lead to substantial ecosystem changes and food web structure changes. But one particular thing that you highlight is the introduction of new predators. And why did you focus on that as well?
That is like a lot of things in data analysis and ecology. It's a little bit based on what kind of data we have. So we did have data on trophic level of fish, and you hardly have that for any other marine animal. And that's why we looked into the different trophic levels of fish species and how fast they're going to move. And there we saw that for the polar regions, actually, the higher trophic levels seem to be moving faster. Yeah. Based on the AquaMaps predictions, and that of course means that in some areas where you don't normally expect a shark to occur or something, suddenly there's going to be this new top predator, and of course that's going to change something in the food web, probably. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the things also mean some other studies have also shown that a lot of the times that species that are occurring in the same kind of environment at the moment, a lot of them will also shift together, which might just mean that sometimes like a whole kind of community will be shifted, and there might be not such huge change as well, but then there's always animals that can't move as fast because their dispersal abilities are limited, or they need to stick around the coast or something like, and others won't. So there's definitely going to be differences in dispersal ability, and there's definitely going to be sort of turnover. We looked at that. We tried to look at that by calculating species co-occurrence, under current condition and also under future conditions. But we didn't manage to do it because it was just way too many species, and we didn't, like with the packages that are available in R at the moment, it was just impossible because it's too many different combinations of species. But what we saw was that the number of new co-occurrences was actually very little. Yeah. Okay. Which I guess is partly like an effect of that species also move together, because at the moment they like the same kind of environmental conditions. Yeah. So if those kind of environmental conditions change, the likelihood that they are going to move or try to move will also be similarly likely. If they can.
If they can. How big is depth? That just sprung to my mind. How much is depth involved in all of this? In this model or in...
depth was one of our parameters, definitely.
Okay, right.
And one of the ones that I couldn't remember before.
Yeah.
And we had a look at what environmental parameter drives the amount of turnover. So we did a random forest analysis to see like which one is the driving environmental parameter. And surprise, surprise, it's temperature. But there was a difference between the different CO2 emission scenarios. So for the lower CO2 emission scenario, it was actually also primary production, because there's a lot of areas sort of in the big ocean areas where there's very little primary production, and in those areas, there will be in future will be even less primary production. So there's also again the question, like, will species then still be there, or like you need to extrapolate the environmental envelope for the species then. So that was one of the major drivers for the lower CO2 emission scenarios, and for the higher ones is then definitely sea ice cover, which is another one of those parameters. Yeah. And because I mean a lot of the ice and the poles will disappear, and then the species that are used to having ice around, they will, move somewhere else or adapt, whatever choice they have, and that's why sea ice coverage and temperature will then be the most important drivers of changes in community, in marine communities.
Interesting. One thing that struck me the most, I don't know why necessarily, but it's always when I look at your figures, figure 2 strikes me the most, because if you look at the highest emission scenario, you can clearly see what kind of is expected to me, as like maybe because I'm a coral ecologist by training, but that the equator is really highlighted by high turnover, by super high turnover, but also the poles.
Yeah, that's the difference in turnover can be driven by either species loss or species gain, or it can be driven by a replacement of species identities, so that you might have the same amount of species but completely different ones in the future. But the Jacquard index that we have on that map, that is overall turnover, so it doesn't distinguish between those different...
between gains
between different reasons for why the community is different. And what you see around the equator is definitely species loss driving the high turnover, and in the polar areas it's a species gain and replacement as well.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much for that. And so now moving into the discussion part of it, what are your main implications of the paper? Why would Helmut say it's the biggest paper coming out of this institute to date?
I definitely need to second this, of course.
Yeah.
No, I think it is important, and this is how I'm not prepared for this interview very well, because it's like I got a question from someone to be interviewed for this and asked Helmut, so what do you do? I mean, you've got lots more experience in giving interviews, and he said you should think about like the 2 or 3 main messages that you that you want your paper to get out about your paper, and I obviously didn't do that. But hang on,
no, it's perfect practice now.
So I think one important thing is that it's not like that we're going to lose all marine species. There's going to be a big change in patterns, and but it's not like we're going to lose half of the marine species, which is, I think, to get away big from the doom and gloom that a lot of those papers sort of give the impression of. I mean, at the same time, if all the species distribution patterns move, this will still have huge consequences for us as humans, because we depend on being able to fish a certain fish in a certain area at the moment, like because of quota and whatever in the EU, but like also because of if a tropical country, like a lot of them get a lot of their protein from fish, then if the fish become a little less around that area especially, then it'll have dramatic impacts on those communities. So that'll be something that we need to adjust. Yeah. So it does have major impact, and
but I mean, your paper helps us prepare for that.
Hopefully, I think just to raise awareness.
Yeah.
Will just that these major changes are ahead, and that they actually happen across all the different organism types. Yeah. And also, what I'd like to stress is there are a big difference. I mean, as you do, normally you report on the most outstanding results, and these are for the high submission. Did I say submission? CO2 emission scenario. And which is at the moment the one that we are following. But I mean, hopefully, maybe some of the climate mitigation actions will actually be successful in the future, and so that we might not actually follow this high emission scenario that was never meant to because it's also something that I read up when I read up about RCP scenarios and stuff, which I thought was very interesting. So I'm going to share this.
Oh yes.
Which was never meant because it's often referred to as the was it what they call the thingy as usual?
The business as usual.
Business as usual, thank you. Scenario, but it was never intended as one. It was meant as a high, like worst case, kind of like high emission scenario. But as it happens, we are still following that one. Like as I was told, with a little dint around Corona, but like we're kind of back on track. But there are big differences. So these huge changes are not going to happen if we manage to follow one of the lower CO2 emission scenarios. Exactly. So, which I think is also like hopeful.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And amongst all the doom and gloom that could be read out of that paper, there's a lot of hope also. Yeah. Cool. Thanks for that. Now that we've talked about your major piece, then we can talk about you as the author. First of all, where are you from?
I'm from Freiburg, the Black Forest.
Yeah, what nobody would have expected from your accent.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. Freiburg. What drew you to the coast and marine stuff? I mean, that's not really a marine space.
No, it's not. And I mean, like, geoecology is not a marine focused subject either. And when I moved to New Zealand to do my master's, I studied statistics. So it was closer to the scene then, definitely.
Yeah.
But it was mainly because I was during my degree in Potsdam, like during the geoecology degree, I was interested in biodiversity. That sort of caught my attention for some reason. We had one course on that, one seminar, and I thought it was super interesting. And because I've always liked diversity in a way, which is like, because I'm always like, when you interview people and you're like, oh, they've always got this real good story about like that they were already interested in whatever when they were a little kid and stuff, and I always thought like, I just find a lot of stuff interesting. But then when I think about it, I already had diversity on my wall when I was a child. I used to have these, like, it was actually rainforest, it wasn't really diversity, but like I really like those rainforest posts, and it's just like, I don't know, plants and animals, and I always liked nice landscapes, which I think was then definitely enforced when I was in New Zealand, just realizing that how good it is to be outside and just in the wild. And
and Freiburg too, right? It's great scenery.
I was never a big fan of the Black Forest, to be honest.
You weren't?
It's too many pine trees. I mean, it's a mixed forest, but still, it was just.
I've never been. It's on my list for sure, but I thought it's like.
I don't know, to be honest. Like, I was never a huge fan of the Black Forest. I mean, Freiburg is cool because you can get everywhere really quickly, like Lake Constance or Switzerland or France. So you do have quite a bit of diversity in terms of landscape, which is a bit what you don't have up here. But anyway, so it's nice, but I'm not like. Okay, this is bad promotion for the Black Forest. Of course, it's real cool down there.
No, I'll still go. But I know somebody.
Yeah, no, it's like, yeah. But I think I got sidetracked a little.
Yeah, no.
What did I say? Oh, yeah. How did I end up here?
Yeah.
Because when I was, in terms of finishing my master's in New Zealand, I had a look around, and I wasn't like totally decided on doing a PhD, but I looked at what kind of job options were there, and all the jobs that I found interesting, they required a PhD. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do a PhD.
Yeah.
And then I looked for PhD positions, and the one that was offered here, actually a former professor of mine from Potsdam sent me the ad for it, and I was like, oh, that sounds cool. And it was about biodiversity as an indicator for ecosystem functioning. And then I applied, and they took me.
Yeah.
And they didn't care that I had a real bad master's degree.
Did you?
Yeah, that didn't work out.
Oh, okay, right. I wouldn't have expected this because like your CV is like there's no gaps in it.
I know, because it was they hired me before I had the mark.
Yeah. Okay. Good to hear. That
Yeah,
there is hope.
so just apply early.
Yeah, exactly. Apply really early. Cool. So from Freiburg to Potsdam, from Potsdam to Otago in New Zealand.
Dunedin is the city, and the university is called University of Otago because Otago is the region.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And then to the ICBM here, the Institute for Chemistry and Biology
of the
sea.
No, of the marine environment.
Oh, right. Okay. Oh, yeah.
I think
here.
it is, isn't it?
Yeah. Here in Oldenburg. And then, so you and Helmut go well back, really well back, way back. That's what you say.
Way back.
Way back.
Yeah, there's nothing in between Helmut and me.
Yeah.
No, like 2010 I started here, and and then he took over my supervision for the PhD, and I just realized that it's really good to work with Helmut, because he gives you a lot of freedom but also support and whatever you really want to do, and I guess a lot of people have made that experience. So
Yeah, I really enjoy it.
I can advertise us even more. And that's how I ended up trying to stick around.
Yeah. And well done until now.
Yeah. I'm still here.
Yeah, exactly. So, and in 2014, you started your first postdoc in the same institute. Yeah.
Project. Yeah, at the same institute. There was, it was lucky because when I was, again, like, just finishing my PhD, there was this project got funded, which is called HIFMB, Biodiversity Ecosystem Functioning Across Marine and Terrestrial Systems. Okay. And it was the project that built those artificial islands.
Yeah, we've talked about them in Lucy's episode.
Yeah, because she's now in the Dynacom in the Ancestor or whatever project.
Yeah.
And that was fun. We built those islands. I was there, like,
you were there,
like, shoveling sand and stuff.
Oh,
yeah.
And
they're getting those sods from the islands to put them in, to plant them on the sand in those islands. Yeah, it was fun. Yeah. Yeah,
I looked at them last summer. Like, one of them tipped or broke or something.
I've got no idea now that I'm in a different project. I don't. But I don't know. But like, we had, like, also in the first winter, we had a lot because there were big storms. A lot of the sand just got washed out, so we had to go back then and like refill them and stuff. So it was a trial and error. It was fun to be part of it, definitely. But I was actually employed as a postdoc for, like, data synthesis and analysis again. But like, I was allowed to go too because they needed every hand.
Okay. So that position took you until December 2017. So were you involved in the founding of HIFMB at all?
I knew this was coming, and I was hoping that it was going to come, but at the time, I was on parental leave.
Ah, yes.
Was I? Hang on. April? No, I was actually already back. True. I think I started again in November 2017.
Okay.
I think that's when you could apply for those positions there, the first cohort of postdocs, and I think that was already decided then. Yeah. Because I started in January 2018 at the HIFMB.
Yeah.
But I wasn't. But I wasn't involved in writing the proposal or anything.
Right. Okay. But you then got hired in 2018 again, and that's the first time HIFMB, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Before then, it was just BEFMATE, wasn't it? I think so. 14, then 18, and parental leave. Yeah. I think I just managed to spread my contract, so like extend it as far that I could just then jump on the HIFMB contract.
Yeah, talking about parental leave, and like, it's not very often being talked about in academia, but first of all, how's the family?
They're good. Good. Yeah.
Yeah, you have two kids, right?
2 girls.
Yeah.
Yep. 2 and 4. Oh, sorry, 5. Turning 6 soon.
Yeah. How is it? How was parental leave for you in your life?
I mean, I'm lucky that my partner was very open to also go on parental leave, because for my first daughter I was only away for 6 months, and for the second for 8 months, and which I think is very helpful in terms of, because you feel like you're just like, because you don't manage to read papers especially before you have your first child, you think, of course, I mean, the baby's gonna sleep and I'll be able to work on something. And I mean, I did keep working on stuff, and also something that I'd never do again, I worked right up before, like till the day before giving birth, kind of, which is something that you shouldn't do.
Okay, yeah. What's the ideal cutoff?
You'll go on Mutterschutz, like maternal leave, like 6 weeks before.
Okay.
Like the date that they think the baby is gonna come.
But you work nonetheless during those 6 weeks. Okay.
Yes, because you want to finish stuff off, and and I then again decided, okay, for the second pregnancy, I'll definitely then like just take a break, and then same thing again, because then you think, oh, I might be able to then just finish this thing off, and never works. But anyway, so that's a good recommendation. I mean, I'm always good at giving advice to other people. Yeah. And then obviously once the child is there, it takes time to take care of it. I mean, some kids apparently just sleep. My ones didn't. And so, you don't end up being able to read a lot, or like every now and then I was able to come in and maybe do a bit of supervision or something with like master students or something. But other than that, you don't have. And that, of course, means that you have a knowledge gap, or also like networking and stuff. You're involved in projects, and then you have to kind of either you have someone to replace, or like the project moves along or something. So it's definitely a bit of a cut in your. And what I think is even more difficult is once you have the kids, it's not like everything finishes when you're back from parental leave. Like, I mean, the kid stays. So it's kind of like, before I was able to work a lot of extra hours, and this is something that I now can't manage. I now work around 40 hours a week, and that's it. Because I don't manage, because when the kids sleep, I kind of fall asleep as well, and sometimes I manage to work then from 9 to 11 or something, but it's not really sustainable for a long run. So
no, exactly.
There's just someone else in your life that takes some time, or deserves some time as well, which makes it more difficult. I mean, I just realized, especially before or during my second pregnancy, when I was thinking, okay, because you kind of want to, the only way, or often the only way to stay in science is then a professorship or something. And for me, an option would have been to write one of those
the travel fellowship kind of thing.
Some kind of thing where you get money and you have your own research group, like a research group lead. And I just realized, like, no way, I'm just not going to be able to finish writing it, or like, because I mean, you work and then, I mean, this is a funny situation of having to work and write proposals and at the same time anyway. But if you then have a kid, I just found that I would not manage to do that. And then I decided, okay, like either it works out in science by some coincidence or whatever, luck or whatever, or I might have to go and work in a different area, which,
And you would have been open to do that?
Certainly. Okay. This is also why I then, as a follow-up project, picked the Faktencheck that I'm working on at the moment. Because that's a national biodiversity assessment where I'm coordinating with Helmut a group of lead authors that then put together a big report on the status and what is changing, or measures and instruments that help to stop or maybe not biodiversity change within Germany. And this is not much of data analysis, or I mean, it's synthesis work definitely, but a lot of the times it's like 50%, I'd say, it's writing emails. And so it's quite different to whatever I did before. But I thought it would be really good, in case I wasn't going to make it in science, to build up this network of people that work in conservation agencies and those things that around here. And because this is like an alternative to science, where a lot of scientists then go and work. And the whole project has opened like this variety in jobs, and also how interesting they can be. And I don't know, landscape planning and those kind of spatial planning. It's not landscape planning. Spatial planning and these, how important they are, because those are the subjects that I always try to avoid when I was studying. Because we had subjects like courses on spatial planning. I was just like, oh my God, I just need to get through, and this is just so boring. and now I realize it's like the essence of marine conservation, because you need those spaces and you have to compete for those spaces like really hard, like with other interests and groups of interests, and it's like the tool. And back then I was just totally a bit oblivious to that, and it's just like, well, this is really boring, and there's just, I don't know, rules and other rules and more paragraphs and all that, and I was like, okay, give me something different. But
you started working in that Faktencheck Artenvielfalt after your second child, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
2021.
Yeah.
In April. Yeah, I started to work with the Faktencheck. Yeah.
Cool. Sorry.
And I think, true, that was actually 1 month after I got back from parent leave from the second one. Yeah.
So you seem to manage.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah. I definitely think it's definitely possible.
Yeah.
But it's also, again, like if you've got people who support you, and like if I go to my advisor and say like, I'm sorry, I'm pregnant, like, and he's like, well, this is not a problem. Like it's a lot different. Then he's like, oh, really? So what are we going to do about your projects? Like, I mean, it very much depends on, and I mean, Avi and again, Helmut and the whole group, they are really supportive of, like whatever.
Yeah, the structures around it are really important.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then parallel to that, though, you started working at the start of this year on the transfer office that you mentioned in the beginning. Could you quickly explain what that is?
It's in the phase of building up. It is meant as a vehicle to be able to transfer knowledge, and transfer, as I've learned, a very and also discussed term, because transfer is often seen as like transferring knowledge from science into all those other who need it. And this isn't, and then people now realize that that's not like the ideal way of communicating and also getting things done and like sustainably. And so it's more sort of like initiating a dialogue between either conservation management and then also addressing decision makers, and trying to be a platform that can provide knowledge on certain facts surrounding biodiversity and biodiversity change. I think it's transfer office for marine biodiversity change. I think that's the whole kind of always, because I mean, in the end you have to kind of specify what is the stuff that you can actually transfer and what you think that you have kind of enough knowledge or can gather enough knowledge about. And so it's on marine biodiversity change. Yeah, and then now there's like, I think there's going to be a big mix of tools that we then can use to try and do that. I mean, Ute Jakob is also working. She's always been working in science and polity on that interface, and she's very active on the European level. And then there was at some point the idea that I would work on maybe indicators, because that a lot of times, like what is done in science in terms of biodiversity change indication, like using with indicators is different to what is used in the assessments. And that was one idea, but we'll just see. I mean, it's in the development, and I think it's super interesting. Like,
it's super exciting.
Moving towards this sort of like just a bit closer to where you see the decisions are being made, and based on what and who decides in the end, and where. Because I think scientists are realizing more and more, I heard people say that more and more now, that scientists should be a lot better aware of what kind of information needs to be sort of filled in, like and who, and to be informed about what kind of political decisions are being made, when that information is actually needed, not just like write in a paper and then it's out somewhere, because the information might be there, but it's not at the place where it needs to be to actually then inform a certain decision on that topic. Yeah. So I think that's super interesting.
Absolutely.
And it's a bit more applied, because that was for a long time my little sort of, like, because you always need to motivate yourself when you're in science, like why do you do what you do, because in the end it's mostly on like this very little detail and stuff, and because I always liked the bigger picture, and that is sometimes very difficult to satisfy when you work in science, and so I like that sort of drift of myself towards that area, like a lot.
Sweet. And where do you see yourself next? What's next for you? Or where do you want to see yourself? I don't know.
First, I'm happy that I am where I am.
Exactly, yeah.
For the moment.
I can imagine.
Give me a break. Yeah. Because I've actually been asked that question recently, like twice. And I was like, I'm just glad that I
Yeah.
now have got a position and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
And but like I don't know, like I don't know how many options there are, but like it kind of just sort of, I think this is a big playground of options where you could go, or how you could then sort of shape your position that you have, and then by different interests and stuff. So
Yeah.
I don't really know, but first at the moment I'm pretty happy where I am.
Yeah. And you seem to be very adaptable and have a lot of interest in other avenues.
Yeah, I think that's good because
Yeah.
often I thought like I'm not one of those real scientists, because I don't like burn just for this one thing that I really want to do.
Same.
And that's why I always felt like I was lacking in a way. And I mean, a lot of people also then said, no, it's good to be a bit of an all-rounder and have lots of interests. But like in the end, when you look at some like ad for a professorship or something, then it's like sometimes very specific of what they ask for. Or like also when you go to conference and stuff, and these people are so like engaged and just so, I don't know, driven by their research questions. And I always thought like, well, this is an interesting question, but I mean, there's also 10 other interesting questions. Like, not that I necessarily would have like hundreds of interesting questions, or I often thought that like other people had a lot more interesting questions. But then I just like, I don't know, pretend to other people what I thought sometimes is necessary then to get a proposal funded or something, or just convince people of that UN research question is the most important one. I just always thought that like I don't have this, I don't know, I'm just not convinced that this is the question that needs to be answered now. And yeah, that's what always made me feel sort of not be a real scientist.
But it got you to a super interesting and super exciting position.
In hindsight,
you
think like, okay, it wasn't too bad then, but So
sweet. So we're almost at the 55-minute mark.
Yeah, I tend to talk a lot.
No, was meant like that. Just like, do you have anything else that you want to add? Anything we've missed? Anything?
I don't think so.
Okay, perfect. Then thank you very much for coming.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.
Want to dive deeper? Surf over to hifmb.de or follow us on Twitter at hifmb_OL.